Good morning. Today's date is August 21st, 2018. My name is Tyrone Bellinger. Today I will be conducting an oral history interview with Bob Doc Miller for the Veterans History Project in partnership with the Dalton Council on Aging. This interview is being taped at the Dalton Community Television Station in Dalton, Mass. Good morning, Doc.
Morning, Ty. How are you this morning?
Good, thank you. Would you please state your full name and spell your last name?
My full name is Robert William Miller, M-I-L-L-E-R.
Thank you. Where do you presently live?
I presently live in Pittsfield, Mass.
Have you lived here a long time? I mean, in Pittsfield, Berkshire County?
I came here in 1970.
Oh, did you? So you're not an inbred Berkshire County?
No, I'm originally from Portland, Maine.
Okay. What is your date of birth and where were you born?
My date of birth is August 17th, 1935. I was born in Portland, Maine.
So you just had a birthday a week ago?
Friday.
Friday.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to have one this Friday.
Oh, great for you, Ty.
But I'm a couple years younger than you.
Come on, don't bring that up.
Did you grow up and go to school there?
Yes, yep.
You went through grammar school, high school?
Grammar school,
all the
middle school, and high school in Portland. Graduated from Portland High School.
Now, we hadn't talked about this before, but did you do anything, or you play any sports or anything in high school that would be of interest?
I was on the track team.
Oh, were you?
In high school, and I was also on my high school ski team.
Really?
Yeah.
No, was it downhill?
Downhill skiing, yes, alpine skiing.
Not cross country?
Not cross country, no. Well, we did combinations back then of downhill and cross country, and you use the same skis, but just a different binding on them.
Really?
Yeah.
I know my son and daughter did cross country, but it was a different.
Yeah, we had to do both.
Oh. Now, what was life like growing up after the Depression? Because you were basically.
Yeah, I went. Well, yeah, I was actually being. I can remember during World War II, the things that we had to go through with coupons, and one of the biggest things I can remember, we used to buy these. Mom and Dad would buy these packages of lard. It was actually lard with a red button, and you squeeze the button, and then you take and you mix the stuff. And it looked like butter, and that's what you use for butter.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard of lard, and of course I know.
Yeah, but that's this red button and made it look like butter when you squeeze it and mixed it together.
Was this government issued? Or?
I don't know. It was in the stores, and you had to purchase in the stores.
Okay.
And another thing that we had to do is we heated by kerosene, and you had plastic jugs that you take down to, say, we used to take it down to a local gas station and fill it up, and I can remember bringing it home. My dad would turn it upside down and set it on a pedestal, and it would drip to run the kitchen stove.
Really?
For heat, yeah.
Wow, you lived in the backwoods, huh?
No, not in the backwoods, but that's the way it was back there. You just didn't have, you know, we never owned an automobile, my family.
Wow.
Yeah. My father worked on the railroad.
I know we give you a hard time, but you weren't still in the horse and buggy.
Not quite the horse and buggy. It was beyond that. But a neighbor of mine did have a Stanley Steven car.
Really?
Yep.
So that was the talk of the town, or?
Oh yeah, he would take that out and he'd run it down the street. And
did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had 3 brothers, and then their next name was Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Really?
Yeah. And 2 sisters, Elizabeth and Margaret. And my mom lost 1 child at birth. Oh. So there were 6 of us.
So you were fairly big family.
Yes, I'm the youngest of the family.
Oh, okay, so there was 8 in the family. Wow. That had to be hard at that time, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, my dad would, I can remember during World War II, the hours he worked. He'd just come home and sleep for a couple hours and then have to go back to the railroad.
Look, I was going to ask you, you know, what did your father do for a living?
Yeah, he worked in the railroad. He was a ICC inspector and an air brakeman. And he worked in the roundhouse where they bring the engines in and work on them.
Oh, really?
And his old saying was, if you work in a roundhouse, you'll never get caught in a corner.
Now, let me ask you a question. Why was it called the roundhouse?
Because it's actually round.
So the trains would...
The trains came in on and would go on a pedestal, and they would turn them to send them into the different stalls.
Oh, okay, all right.
To be worked on.
Because there's one of those down county, there used to be anyway.
Right,
down in
right. They call it the turntable. They call it the turntable.
Oh.
Yeah.
I always wondered why it was like that. Was he a veteran, your father?
No.
Did you graduate from high school?
Yes. Yeah, I graduated in 1954.
Now, we talked earlier about joining the service. Now, you were actually in the reserves?
I joined the Naval Reserves when I was a junior in high school.
So but you had to get your parents' permission?
I had to get my parents' permission. Right. We had a teacher that was a commander in the Naval Reserves, and he got us to join the Naval Reserves. And we went to meetings on weekends, and then I believe it was on Wednesday nights we'd be training. And during the summer, between the 2 years that we were sent to Bainbridge, Maryland for just 2 weeks. And then we'd come back and keep on training. And then I did that twice. And then as soon as I got out of high school in June, that following December, I requested to go on active duty. And that's when my Navy career started.
I was just going to ask you what branch of the service. Because
it was in the United States Navy.
United States Navy. Now, is that because, why did you join the Navy?
Well, my two brothers, my two oldest brothers, Thomas and Harry, were both in the Navy during World War II. Harry went in. He was in the Naval Reserves back in the 30s, and he went on active duty 5 days before Pearl Harbor.
Really?
All right. And he was on a troop transport. They took the USS America, the SS America, and made it into a troop ship for the military.
Yeah.
And he was on that for a while. Then I believe he was on a seagoing tug. He was a signalman. And my other brother, Tom, went in 43, I believe. He went in 43 and served under destroyer escort.
Now, was this in the Pacific or the Atlantic?
Well,
or both?
Both. Well, Tom was mostly in the Atlantic. Harry was both in the Pacific and the Atlantic crossings.
The Atlantic was actually, the way I understand it, a little bit more dangerous at that time.
At that time, because of the German U-boats.
Right, they were sinking.
They're crossing, right. Well, in fact, in my hometown of Portland, Maine, that's where a lot of what they called Liberty ships were built, or troop transports, and they predicted they'd only probably do one crossing.
Really?
Because they were built that quickly. And then some of them were sunk by U-boats up in the North Atlantic.
Say, they were the prime target.
Right.
Because of the troops.
That's right.
Wow. I would not have liked to have gone to Europe anyway, but when did you choose the branch of this? Why did you choose the branch of the service? You did mention that because your brothers were in.
Right.
And you were from the Navy town.
Right. Well, Portland, Maine was a big Navy port during World War II. In fact, the harbor up there was deep enough that the larger ships could come in there and actually turn around, and they'd form the convoys there to go overseas.
Now, you talk about convoys. I know I've talked with other fellas. Do you remember, or do you know how big some of these convoys were?
Well, a convoy you may have troop ships in the middle or an aircraft carrier in the middle. And then on the outside of that, you'd have your battleships, maybe 2 or 3 battleships. And outside of that, you'd have your destroyers. And outside of that, you'd have your destroyer escorts, which were smaller. And these outer ships were there to protect the larger ships in the middle, to protect that aircraft carrier. And
so they were basically looking for the U-boats?
U-boats, and if a torpedo came, it would be probably up to, if they couldn't dodge it, it would be up to that destroyer escort to probably get in the way of it.
Really?
To protect that large ship in the middle.
That's why I didn't join the Navy.
In fact, my brother's destroyer escort came into Portland, Maine.
Really?
Yes, he was an engineman on it, and they let him come home because we lived there. He let him come on Liberty to the house, and they actually give him some food to bring to the house off that ship.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of, I'm trying to think of the word, you know, being in the Navy and going in your hometown.
Right. And my mother, during World War II, worked at what they called the Chamber of Commerce, a Mothers Club, Navy Mothers Club. When the sailors came in off the ships into Portland, this was a place for them to go. They'd have a band there for them to dance. And at times she would bring sailors home to my house.
So it was similar, what your mother did was similar to USO, but it wasn't
Right.
USO.
Right.
Because USO was overseas, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And, oh,
Yeah.
that was nice of them. So now in your basic training, I know you were in the reserves, but where did you go basically for basic training?
Well, our basic training was those two tours, those two-week tours at Bainbridge, Maryland. That was
your
it.
basic training?
That was basically our basic training, and then we had the training at the reserve centers on the weekends.
Oh, so you got on-the-job training, or
Right.
well,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
What was your experience, or what did you learn during your basics?
Well, during your basic, like we learned, was a lot of, you know, your first aid. You were taught the weapons that may be on the ships. You know, your 5-inch 38 stuff, and first aid and Navy history and traditions of the service, just about a lot of that stuff, and then you prepared you to go on active duty.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question because my daughter knows an awful lot about these knots, but did you learn Navy knots?
Yes, this is in our 2-week training, and yeah, you had to learn the basic knots, your square knots, your half hitches, and that sort of thing, because we tied a square knot around our necks on our uniforms. That kerchief we wore was actually a square knot.
So all that training was just to tie a little
Yeah.
Well, it was the Navy.
It was the Navy.
Was it hard to adjust to the new life of the military?
No, it wasn't for me. I already thought, growing up, you know, being around sailors and all that stuff, that this is what I wanted. In fact, when I went on active duty, I actually told my mother I'd see you in 20 years.
Really?
I knew I was going to make a career out of the service.
You knew then?
Then that
Wow.
I'd make a career out of the service.
I would have never thought of that myself. I mean, I was just hoping to get through my first tour, and that was... Do you remember any of your instructors at basic training or boot camp or anything like that?
No, too many years ago.
Can you describe how you felt on the day you graduated from basic training, knowing you had successfully...
Yeah, well, I felt
finished?
good about it, and I, came home, and my family's kind of proud of me, and knowing that I'd be being in the service.
Did you get a furlough after basic training, or I think you...
No, basically no, because, it was just that 2 weeks training we did in the summer.
Yeah.
So, and then
So when you went into active duty...
you went right into active duty.
Wow. How did it feel coming home, though, in uniform, even in high school when you did your basic training?
Oh, I felt real proud of wearing a uniform back then, and your military people were appreciated back then.
Well,
Highly
it's
appreciated.
a little bit different.
A little bit different than
Yes,
at the end, by the end of my career in the military.
All right, now I'm going to get into your 20 years military career, if you don't mind.
Fine.
Where did you report to next after you...
Well, actually, I went to Boston, Massachusetts, the headquarters there to get it signed, because I was going from reserve status to active duty status to get reassigned. And then I was transferred to a place called Orange, Texas, and the Sabine River down in Texas, where they had a mothball fleet. These were the ships that were brought into mothballs.
Yeah.
And we worked on those. That was a deckhand. I was just a seaman, seaman apprentice as a deckhand, and all we did was chip paint and paint.
That's what, a lot of people look at the Navy. I mean, because there's a lot of downtime.
Right.
So that's why the ships always basically looked good.
Yeah, well, these ships were put into mothball to eventually, a lot of them were from World War II. In case they needed them again, they put them in mothballs. They would pump air through them, and we'd be on the decks, and we'd start at the stern and go to the bow chipping and under the gun tubs and chipping and painting.
And just get them prepared just
in case they had to go, they wouldn't be rust buckets.
Oh. I mean, it must have been a monotonous job.
It was very, very monotonous. And if you lay under a gun tub, because the gun tubs are a little bit above the deck, and they had these, what they call chippers. They were a 3-prong thing, and they were run by air. And you had to hold those against the metal, and they would just vibrate to chip the paint off.
Take everything. Now, once you got the paint off, now when
then you had to put what they call red lead on.
Like
it was a lead paint primer. Okay. Actually, lead paint.
Really? Oh.
And then you'd paint the gray over that.
Wow. All right. So after all your training and learning how to paint a ship,
I wasn't too happy with that stuff. So,
how long did you do that?
I only did that for about 3 months.
Well, 3 months. That's not bad.
And then they came out with a notice that they was looking for hospital corpsmen. And I really didn't know what a hospital corpsman was. I knew it had something to do with medicine. And me and another fellow put in for it. And we had to go get interviewed by a Navy chief hospital corpsman at the base down here in Texas. And he recommended both of us to become corpsmen. And I looked at it as a way to get out of Orange, Texas. Because right outside the gate of Orange, Texas, I'll tell you how far back it was, they had wooden sidewalks.
Did they have hitching rails for the...
No, they didn't have hitching rails, but they actually, you went down a block from the base and they had wooden sidewalks where a pool hall was and a couple of beer joints. And
wow.
And I wanted out of there.
Well, I didn't blame you. So now you were accepted into Corpsman School.
In the Corpsman School, which was at Great Lakes. It was a 6-month school of learning basic medicine, you know, your first aid, how to do a blood pressure, and all different types of preparing you to go to work in a hospital, more or less to go to work as a hospital as an assistant to the nurses or the doctors in a hospital.
Well, I was just going to ask you, maybe corpsman is close to being a nurse, or?
Yes, I would say in today's world would probably be not a practitioner, but pretty close to being a nurse.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that a lot of fellows who were corpsmen or medics of the Army go into a nursing field later on when they're out.
Yeah.
And they have the experience, I guess.
Right, yeah.
So they have to, now you mentioned Oakland Naval Hospital.
Right, when I left Corps School, I went out to Oakland Naval Hospital, which was called Oak Knoll, the nickname for Oak Knoll. It was outside of Oakland, just on the outskirts of Oakland. And it was a huge hospital, Navy hospital. And all the buildings were connected together. And I went to work on the officers' ward, where all the patients are officers. And we had in fact, it was so highly rated that the doctor on there was was a captain, which would be, in any other branch of service, would be a full bird.
Yeah.
And that was the senior doctor on the ward. And any officers would come there, you know, anything from pneumonia or any kind of sickness we'd have.
You got them in your ward?
We got them in our ward. That's where the officers was. And we would be, that's where we learned how to do, change bandages if they'd come from surgery. And we learned how to give injections and to do an IV on somebody. This is the type of training we got there.
Yeah.
So it advanced us to go further on. And one of the most experiences I ever had there was Admiral Chester W. Nimitz.
Really?
Was a patient there, a 5-star admiral. During World War II, he was senior admiral in the Pacific Fleet. And I was more or less his special corpsman.
Really?
Yeah. I was the only corpsman that would go into his room, plus the nurses.
Yeah.
And he was such a gentleman. I think back now how he took us, a young boy like me, sat me down in the room and asked me my history, where I'd come from, you know, what I wanted to do. And when I told him I was from Maine, he says, "You remember the name Margaret Chase Smith?" Margaret Chase Smith was a congressman from Maine in World War II.
Really?
And he told me how he had taken her, met her, and took her out on a submarine. And when he left the ward, I have a picture at home. It's signed to R.W. Miller, Best of wishes, Chester W. Nimitz.
Wow.
That I have at home. That's
That
one of my experiences there.
That and $2 will get you a cup of coffee.
Get me a cup of coffee, maybe downtown.
All right, after the hospital.
After the hospital, after I left the ward, I worked on the security force at the hospital, because in a naval hospital, everything is done by corpsmen, nurses, and doctors. Even the security force, what we call the master at arms.
Yeah, or an MP would be
Like
similar to
an MP, or actually Navy corpsmen.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know
Everything
that.
in the hospital, supplies, everything is run by Navy corpsmen. You don't have any yeomen or personnel men or any of those things.
Yeah, see, I would have assumed that the Marines were part of the Navy, that they would have supplied the security, but they didn't. Huh?
No, not in a naval hospital.
Oh. That's interesting. Like I say, you learn something every day.
Yeah, yeah. And then from there, I was assigned to the Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps has no medical or religion personnel.
Navy covers the religion.
The religion and the medical personnel. Because I understand, and well, you being a Marine, everybody in the Marine Corps is basically a rifleman.
Yeah.
A medic or nurse, or we're considered non-combatant. This is why the Marine Corps is part of the Navy.
Okay, yeah, for the non-combatant
Right.
part. Now, let me ask you a question. Did you have to go through the Marine Corps basic training?
Not completely. They took us down to Camp Pendleton, California. In fact, it was over at Del Mar, where we went through, at Camp Pendleton, where we went through weapons, didn't know how to use them, war tactics. So they took us over into the other side of the base and trained us. Trained us just like an infantryman, but it wasn't Parris Island.
Yeah. Well, we did, see, when I went through Parris Island, we did have a couple of Navy corpsmen that went through training with us.
Yeah, well, we didn't do that. This was all done at Camp Pendleton.
Oh, okay.
But we had, the Marine Corps was training us.
Yeah.
And then from there, you get assigned to a Marine out unit. And after school, I was then transferred to Japan. I went out with the 3rd Battalion, let me see, what was it? 3-9, Hotel Company, 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines, at the base of Mount Fuji, Japan.
Really?
Yeah, we had, there was 3 camps there. There was South Camp, Middle Camp, and North Camp, right outside there. The only city there was called Gotemba, Japan, which now has a beautiful golf course, but it's at the base of the mountain where the lava is. And
yeah.
This is where I was I was with an infantry company there. And I was with them. We were there about 6 months, I believe, at the mountain, and then we packed up, went down to the Philippines, did an amphibious landing at the Philippines for training, and then we came back to Okinawa. And this is where I spent another 6 months at Okinawa with the same outfit as a corpsman.
You basically, you were with the line company.
I was a line company.
Infantry.
Yeah.
Infantry.
Infantry, and this is where I took it upon myself, and any other corpsman that joined the unit, because I got promoted to 3rd class petty officer there. I took it upon myself and asked the Marines if I could learn how to use all their weapons. In fact, well, not typically, I wasn't qualified because I couldn't be qualified.
Yeah.
But I learned how to fire the .30 caliber machine gun, the M60. No, not the M60. Then we called the BAR, Browning automatic rifle, the BAR, the M1 rifle, the carbine, the .45 caliber pistol.
He said, "You were in the Navy. I was in the Marine Corps. You fired more weapons than I did." Wow.
I never got to fire a .50 caliber though, which I always wanted to fire.
I mean, I've seen them in action. I've never fired one, but they're
oh yes, they're quite a weapon.
Awesome. So after you're overseas, you came back to Portsmouth?
No, I came back
to Pendleton?
Pendleton, and I think I spent another 6 months at Camp Pendleton. And then I was transferred, excuse me, I was transferred from there to the shipyard in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which actually the shipyard's in Kittery, Maine. This is where they were building submarines.
Oh, okay.
And I was assigned to the dispensary in the shipyard. And we took care of civilians, and we were more or less there in case somebody got hurt when they were building the submarines and what they call the ways inside the buildings. And if somebody got hurt, we'd go out and have to take care of the individual. And we would go into the buildings where they had submarines, where they were building the submarines. And one of the buildings we'd go into an emergency. There was one civilian. We'd be working on somebody, and we could look up, and there'd be a stretcher above us. Him and the crane operator inside that building, whenever we came into the building, would always get a stretcher and hung it on the crane and have it ready for us in case we needed it.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you know, the corpsmen were important people. You know, to me, the corpsman was the most important person.
Well, if you get with the Marine Corps as a corpsman, you're put in a pedestal.
Yeah.
They take good care of us, and there's things we can do that nobody else could do. We get away with it.
Well, this is it. I've explained to people that, like I say, the corpsman to us was the most important person in the squad or platoon, because we took care of the corpsman, maybe a little bit more than everybody else, because if something happened, the corpsman was going to hopefully take care of us.
I mean, to go back to Camp Pendleton, I was there. That's where I made second class, which is equal to a staff sergeant.
Yeah.
So I moved into the staff barracks, and I had access to the staff NCO club. And a lot of times on Saturday, I'd go to the mess hall, or the chow hall, where we ate.
Yeah.
And I'd have to do an inspection. And I'd walk out of there, and after my inspection, I'd say maybe walk out with a dozen steaks. Sunday morning, we'd go to the staff club, and we would barbecue steaks that came from the mess hall.
So you actually probably got one of my steaks.
Yeah, being a Navy corpsman, I could get these things because that's the way the Marines treated us.
Yeah.
In fact, I just thought about this. We had the Marine Corps birthday is a very big thing.
Right.
At our staff club, they had a band, they had everything going on. And I walked up to the band. I think I get probably $5 back then. That was a lot of money. I told them to play Anchors Away. And I went out and stood in front of the dance floor while they played Anchors Away. And the sergeant major just looked and shook his head and said, "Doc, you're crazy." But this is the way we could do. This is the way the Marines just took good care of us.
Yeah.
But go back to at the shipyard in Portsmouth. I was there, and then I got transferred from the shipyard to the Naval Hospital in Portsmouth. And I worked in medical supply there. I worked there, and that's it. That's where I met my beautiful wife. In 1961, I met my wife there.
In Portsmouth?
In Portsmouth, yeah.
So you weren't too far from home?
No, Portland, Maine was my home.
Yeah.
Her home was Biddeford, and they used to come down there to a dance, and that's where I met her.
Oh, okay.
Portsmouth.
Well, that's good.
And married her in 1962.
62. Married a long time?
Yeah, yeah. I was stationed at Portsmouth when the submarine Thresher went down.
Really?
Yeah, that's when she was in an attack boat that was built at Portsmouth, and she went out on sea trials. Something happened. She wanted to do a dive and never came up.
Wow.
In fact, they had 17 blankets from me, from my medical supply for the civilians that was on board. And I got called in, possibility of going out on the Albacore, which was a submarine, to look for her, but I didn't go. And I was also qualified in the diving chamber. we had at Portsmouth in case they did find somebody.
Yeah.
I'd be the medic that would go into the diving chamber with them.
Did they ever find them? I mean, I'm not too much in history.
They found the boat, and I don't know if they ever recovered it or not, but I mean, they lost all hands on it.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Wow.
The only person that there was the executive officer did not go out on her because his wife has just been put in the hospital, and he didn't go out on her. And he was the only actual survivor of the crew.
Wow. That's tragedy. So now after you Portsmouth.
Portsmouth, and I was transferred from Portsmouth in '63 or '64. I went down to the hospital in Portsmouth, Virginia, for advanced hospital corps school, what they call B school. This school, once you went through this school, you were then qualified for what they call independent duty. You could go out on a ship by yourself with no doctor. You were it.
You were the only medical personnel on the ship.
You were the only medical personnel on the ship.
So you could handle just pretty much everything.
Everything. And yeah, from after that school, I picked up a gasoline tanker out of Charleston, South Carolina, what they call an AOG. It was only a 310-foot tanker. She carried MoGas, aviation gas, JP fuel, and some black oil, which some of the ships ran on black oil. And I was the only medic on it. I had my own little sick bay. And we would travel to the Mediterranean and more or less refuel the amphibious. We would travel with the amphibious fleet. And we were capable of pumping fuel to the beach for the Marines. Really? Yeah, that's how they got their fuel for their tankers and stuff, for their Jeeps and everything else. If they made a landing, there was the only way for them to get fuel.
Yeah, but you couldn't get that close to the land, could you?
We only drew 16 feet of water when we were fully loaded. So we could go and they'd float a rig out to us and we could pump to the beach.
Oh, I always wondered how they did that.
Yeah, yeah. And then we would refuel we could refuel an LSD, which is a landing ship dock that carried Marines on it. Yeah. We could be underway actually moving and refuel them, or else they'd be anchored and we'd come alongside of them and tie up alongside of them and pump to them for the amphibs on that ship.
How many gallons would you carry total? I mean,
I know one time we took on 85,000 gallons of aviation fuel. We were pumping. We were taking fuel from a AO, which is a huge tanker ship.
A bigger one.
Well, much bigger, 900 footer.
That would be out deeper.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we would 900 footer, and we would hook. We would float. We'd put rigs over to each ship, and we're taking on avgas. And all of a sudden, this AO started to swerve, and our skipper kept swerving with it. And we couldn't understand what was going on. And I was up on the bridge, standing right next to the captain. And he turned around, looked at me, and he said, "Doc, get down on the tank deck. Get the kids off the deck. We're going to have an emergency breakaway. You and the boatswain mate are going to break away." A boatswain mate in the Navy is the one that does all the rigging and takes care of all the stuff. He said, "When I turn around, I shake my head, you guys break it loose." So I went down, stood there, and all of a sudden he turned around, shook his head. We broke it loose, and the hoses were flying. We got covered with avgas. That tanker got covered with avgas. Our skipper come up alongside that thing, and just as he reached the bow, he turned and pulled away. And a kid on our ship touched that ship when we went by. Oh. If we had touched each other, we would have been gone.
Sparks?
Oh yeah, sparks to both ships would have probably blown.
Wow.
And the captain of my ship, the captain is Russell was his name. He could put this thing. This was a twin screw electric drive boat. We had 4 diesel engines that ran 2 generators that ran the electric motors that ran the props. And he could put this ship anyplace. Yeah. This man was he had never raised his voice But that night, he called me up to his stateroom, and he couldn't sleep. So I gave him a phenobarbital tablet and a little tiny bottle of brandy, and he slept.
Now let me ask you a question. You mentioned aviation fuel. That mainly went to aircraft carriers, no?
No, that went to, I mean, for helicopters.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not thinking of helicopters. You know, you're thinking, you know, when you're saying
Aviation fuel, yeah.
Fuel, and you're out at sea. I just assume it was an aircraft carrier.
No, we wouldn't pump to an aircraft carrier. The big AOs would pump to them because they took on.
Well, that's true. They're out, way out too.
They're out,
okay,
then they're taking on all kinds of fuel.
See, there's so much involved with this whole military thing, anyway. And you saw a lot more of it than.
Yeah, and in fact, it was funny. The captain of the ship, Russell's his name, and we had a chief quartermaster on there by the name of Becker. At one time, Becker was a first-class petty officer, and Russell was a third-class petty officer, quartermaster under him.
Really?
And they got stationed together on the ship. And me and the chief hung around together because I was a senior first class and he was the only chief on the ship. We'd go on Liberty, and the captain would say, "Where are you two going to be at?" He'd come over and join us. And to this day, we're still very close.
Good.
Becker, we lost about 2 months ago, passed away. But Russell and I keep in contact with each other. And in fact, we're going to be together next month in Myrtle Beach for our last ship's reunion.
You mentioned the reunion.
Yeah. So I rode that ship from '64 to 1967.
Wow. 3 years aboard it, but you got leave.
Oh yeah. When we'd come back into Charleston, well, I was living in Charleston with my family.
Oh, okay, all right.
And that was our home port. We lived in Charleston. In fact, my wife still thinks about it. We got to Charleston. I was in New Jersey. I was just visiting my sister, and my brother called me up and said, "We just got a message. They want you to report in early aboard the ship." So we drove down to Charleston. I found a motel that night. I went aboard the ship, and they said, "You better find an apartment because we're going to sea in 2 days."
Really?
So I found an apartment for my wife in 2 days and went out to sea for 2 weeks, came back in again. And then this is the way we'd operate. We'd go to the Med for 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, and then come back into Charleston, spend time in Charleston. And eventually we moved from that apartment into in Navy housing, which was very, very nice. And that's where my twins were born, in Charleston.
Wow. I just didn't know, when you're out like that, you were there for 3 years. I didn't know if you were out for 3 years. But
you'd go back. You'd go out. If you went to the Mediterranean, you'd go over for usually 6 to 8 months, and then you'd come back into port, and you'd just go to the ship every day, like a job.
Oh, okay. So now you're back. Now you're at 67. You're done with that.
Yeah.
You're going back to Portland?
I went back to Portland, Maine.
Man.
To what the Marine Corps calls I&I duty, inspector instructor, at a Marine Reserve Training Center in Portland, which was an old public health hospital at one time.
Really?
And it was probably a half a mile from my house, so I was born and brought up.
Really?
In fact, I used to go up to this place, and the side of the hospital was a hill that went down to the water and had lights on it. I would take my skis and walk up there, and I'd put in 6 poles down the hill so I could train skiing at night.
Really?
In this place. And then when I got there, the Marine captain says, "Let's walk around this building. I'll show you the building." I said, "Yeah." So we started walking around. He said, "That's the morgue over there." We go upstairs. I says, where the sick bay was, what we call sick bay, which was going to be my office. Well, this used to be part of the mess hall. "How do you know that?" I said, "Well, I used to sell papers here when I was a kid in the building."
Really?
So this is in my hometown.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a rough part of my duty.
I was just going to say, that had to be interesting, really interesting.
It was interesting, but
things had to have changed.
My job there was when a kid got wounded or killed in Vietnam, I would go with the captain to notify the family. And this is why they put a lot of these corpsmen in our hometowns.
Because you knew the family, sir?
We knew we knew our way around and what to do. And it was tough. It was a tough duty. You could walk into a house, and I walked into a house in Biddeford, Maine, my wife's hometown, and a woman looks at me and says, "Aren't you Rachel Duval's brother-in-law?" And they knew who you were, and it was tough. And there was one place we used to stop across the street from this bakery. Was a bar. We'd go in there once in a while to have a beer. And this boy's his son was in Vietnam. And a lot of times you couldn't write back where you was at.
Yeah.
So the Marines I was with an interpreter trying to tell the boy, and he says, every time you guys walk in the door, I get nervous. And he was told, well, don't worry about it until we come up in the green car and we're in dress uniform. 3 days later, we walked in there. And, and that was tough. And then there was, I think one of the worst situations is we went down to a family right in my neighborhood where I was born and brought up. And the boy was killed. And it was a closed casket. And at that time, I believe it was down south someplace, there was a mix-up in a body. Some kids in Vietnam had swatched dog tags.
Really?
So the body was it was a closed casket down there, but it was the wrong kid.
Wow.
They went strictly by the dog tags.
Yeah.
So this woman had heard about it. It was on the national news, I believe, and the mother had heard that, and she wanted to go open the casket. And the Marine captain, we left, and he says, "Doc," he says, why don't you go down and talk to him? Because, this boy's father knew my father. So I walked in the house, and you know how the Marine Corps has a boot camp picture?
Yeah.
It was sitting on a mantle. And I looked at the parents, and I says, "Do you see that picture up there?" I says, "That's what you're going to remember your son look like the rest of your life. If you go to that casket, this is what you're going to remember. I will go to the funeral parlor. I will open that casket, and I will find out if there's your son," which I did. And his dog tags and stuff was in there. I mean, it was tough to look at, but I did it because that's, it's a kid.
Yeah.
It's his family. And I did that for 2 years.
Wow.
And the thing was, I hadn't been to Vietnam yet. So it was tough for these kids. And there was one instance, I can tell this. We were looking for a family up in Limerick, Maine. And we found the father. And we notified the father. And we had a difficult time trying to find the mother because he didn't know where she was at. They had split up or something. So he goes up to this general store, and I tell to this Marine Corps captain, I says, "Captain," I says, "you do not say a word in this store. I am going to do the talking." Being from Maine, I walk in, I says, "Hey, I said, ain't seen Bessie, have you? Bessie Jackson?" I said, "I've been looking for her, and I can't seem to find her." And guy in the store pointed right up where she was living.
Really?
Yeah. But I used my Maine accent.
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
You still got it pretty good.
Oh yeah. And from there, when I left there in 1969, I was headed for Vietnam, and I went out to Coronado, California, to what they call advisors school.
Yeah.
I was going to become an advisor, and I thought I would be going onto the boats in Vietnam, and the PBR boats, because a lot of sailors, this is where they were in these PBR
Brown
boats.
water?
The brown water boys. And I get out there, and this is where you go through, 6 weeks of religion. You learn all about the religion of the Vietnamese people, the culture, and you learn a little bit of the language. They're supposed to be teaching you the language, which it was difficult to figure it out. And then they took us up to Camp Pendleton, California for infantry training.
But you know, the nice thing was, you got...
I had already been through a lot of this stuff with the Marines. So we get up to Pendleton. It's all Navy personnel. You know, and they're teaching you how to fire mortars and the whole work. So we were doing them, 40 millimeter mortars, I'll never forget it, and one misfired. So this gunnery sergeant, look, you, get up here. Catch this thing when it comes out. And this Navy commander, no, these sailors, we don't know anything about this. He says, Doc's done this I don't know how many times. I had served with him before. So all the training we were going through, and then we had to go up and attack a place, you know. I did the 4 games. So we get down, this Navy lieutenant's in charge of the platoon. So we get down and I go up to him and says, Lieutenant, let me give you some pointers. So we get out over this fire break. You know the fire breaks at Pendleton, the big fire breaks. And there's a little stream down there, so I says, now we're going to walk in this stream. What for? We're going to get wet. I says, the stream makes noise. I mean, this is what the Marines have taught me. So you can walk in there. You're not going to make any noise. You're not going to, you know. So we get down and then we lay in the deep grass. And I said, now at daybreak, we're going to go up this fire break and we're going to attack. So we go up and we do attack and we win. And the same gunnery sergeant says, Doc, damn you. You know, he thought he'd have. And then part of that training was we go out in the desert and they capture you and they put you in a POW camp for training. And this is where they hadn't eaten. And, you know, you've been out there 3 or 4 days in the desert and then they capture you and they're trying to break you, trying to give you an idea that if you get captured, what might go on. Yeah. And they put you in a black box. And then one thing they made us do was rake a path with your fingernails in the dirt. And one of the things they were going to feed us, so they give us a little mess kit. And we go up and this guy's, they're dressed in supposedly North Vietnamese uniforms. Yeah. And you could smell this beef stew. And we all get in line to do it, and all of a sudden he reaches up and he just kicks it like this into the dirt. And this is part of the training.
See, you got a lot more training than I did.
Well, this type of thing we did is in case you did get captured, because we was going to be advisors. We was going to be working with the Vietnamese people. And it was good training. It'd give you an idea. And if you flunked it, you lost your security clearance.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
And then when, from after the school, I got 3 days home with the family. Then I flew to Vietnam. Where
did you fly out of to go to Vietnam?
I flew out of Travis Air Force Base.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, and we landed in Guam and refueled. And then we flew into Saigon. Because when we flew into Saigon, they don't just about don't even shut the engines off. You just unload and they load and they take off. So I got into Saigon, you know, I can't remember the name of the hotel they put us in, but then they started to interview us. I got out of the Navy shipyard to be interviewed. And I thought I was going to go on the boats. And Admiral Zumwalt had just taken over the area. And there's a shipping channel come up out of the South China Sea into Saigon. And there was 2 rivers. There was the Soi Rap and the Long Tao. The Long Tao was a shipping channel, but she was weavy up through this 400 square miles of swamp. So Admiral Zumwalt decided, the Army had been down in there, and the Army, he decided he wanted the Marine Corps in there. So he picked 3 of us Navy corpsmen. I says, what am I getting into? So we had a team down at the mouth of the river, had a team halfway up the swamps. There's 400 square miles of swamp there, which had been sprayed with
Agent Orange.
Agent Orange, because Admiral Zumwalt's son was on the boats, and he died of cancer. Yep. And Admiral Zumwalt, they asked him if he'd ever do it again. He said yes, because of the number of lives he saved. So, and then we had a team at Naval Naval Base. This is where the PBRs, the the Brown Water Navy operated out of. Yeah. And we had the Vietnamese base right outside of that, and that was our headquarters on the Vietnamese base. And I lived in a village called Quan Xuyen. There was 4 Marines, myself, and 1 Army intelligence officer. And we lived in the village, and the same thing was down at Can Yo, where they had the team down there. And we operated with local forces. And I was an advisor to a Vietnamese doctor and his medics. And then I would work with them, and also we would go out on operations with the local forces. The Marines would go out on operations with them, and I'd go out on those operations. Yeah. And then every once in a while we would, I'd talk to my counterpart, which was Tui Lip. I'd go over to his place. And I'd say, Tui, I said, maybe Sunday we go to Linh Yun or one of the other villages. And it wouldn't be 15 minutes later, he'd walk into my hooch and he'd say, Boxy, you get helicopter, we go. He made the decision, not me. And as an advisor, this is what we were taught to. Yeah. Let the Vietnamese make the decision. We could suggest to them. It'd be like me going in your backyard and you're growing tomatoes. If I tried to tell you how to do it, you'd get upset with me. But if I suggested something and walked away, you would accept it. And this is the way we operated with these people.
Were these like medcap?
These are what they call medcaps. We'd go in.
Patrols?
Yeah, we'd go in and we'd fly in by helicopter. Or we'd go in by boat. Yeah. And we would treat the civilians as well as the local forces in the villages. And it's funny, the first time I went with them, I took my M16, I had my grenades, and all this crap, non-combatant. And I'm sitting there, I'm saying, why am I got all this gear? I'm the only American here. And the rest are all Vietnamese. So from then on, I just carried my .38 if we'd gone to meet some medicaps. And this was, to me, was very, very helpful. I mean, I was helping them people.
Yeah, you were helping the popular forces.
The local forces, people. The popular forces, the civilians. And in return, I think they had a lot of respect for me. And I had a lot of respect for them because they were protecting their own backyards. It wasn't like, say, fellas like you that went over there at 19 years old and were thrown into combat. Heavy, heavy combat you guys went through. And not realizing what you were doing. Or with me, I mean, I was 34 years old. I was older.
You were an old man.
I was an old man. But I was helping people. This was my job. And yes, I was on patrols at night. That was a different story. And I did a lot of medevacs. If somebody in one of the outlying villages would get hurt, naturally they'd radio into the Vietnamese side. They would come to us trying to get a medevac in if they'd been hit or something. Yeah. And to do these medevacs, they'd have to fly in and pick me up with my interpreter and fly into these villages. No Americans on the ground. These pilots were relying upon me and my interpreter to give me the right information so I could tell the pilot to get these helicopters in, get the wounded or whatever it was, and get them out of there. And these pilots, I tell you, they were fantastic. They would do anything.
Medevac pilots were fantastic throughout the whole war. Yeah.
There was one spot we went into, I mean, there was a compound, narrow compound, and he put that bird down in there and got it out of there. I mean, it was amazing. Yeah. And then I got to know the pilots real well. I mean, some of them. And then we had the 240th, I believe it was, helicopter went out of Ben Yun that flew for us. That when we would go on operations, they picked us up.
Really?
Yeah. And I got to know these guys pretty good. And sometimes on Sundays, they always wonder how we could always get a helicopter on Sunday. Well, we had the best rice wine in the county, in the area, in the country. So the pilots would fly in and we'd take care of them with the rice wine. It sounds like, you know, it was on a picnic, but I mean, these guys, they were just so fantastic. I can remember one night I was radio relaying for a team of Navy SEALs. It was in on an op. And I was relaying, and they got hit. They got a couple of wounded. So I was trying to get a medevac, and all of a sudden, I heard this one pilot, "Work off 6, this is Stingray 2. He says, "We'll go in. We're pretty close. We're going to go in." Now, these weren't medevacs pilots. These are regular pilots.
Yeah.
They flew in and picked up these SEALs and got them the hell out of there. I mean, they would do anything.
Oh, yeah.
They're Army pilots. They're fantastic. Young kids.
Yep.
And then after my tour of duty there, I came back to the big city of Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And I remember getting my orders, and I flew into Saigon on a chopper and called my wife, and I says, "Hey, we're going to Pittsfield, Mass. There must be around Boston someplace. Why don't you check it out?"
Surprise, surprise,
surprise. So the wife and I, after coming home, we're living in Biddeford, Maine, where her family was while I was in Vietnam. And we drove into Pittsfield, and I looked. We drove into Park Square. I said, "I have been here." And I remembered back 1955, I hitchhiked from Maine to Great Lakes to go to Corps School. And a fellow come over Route 20. That was before the Pike, I think, was completed. He let me off in Park Square. I said, "Go down a block, and that's Route 20 going over." And I remember coming in there back then.
Yeah, Pittsfield's a big city back then.
Oh, yeah. They had a Navy Reserve unit here.
Yeah.
And had the Navy Seabees, had a Surface Division, Navy Seabees. At one time, they had a Marine Corps Reserve unit here.
They had a Marine Corps, they had Army Reserve, National Guard, and we had everything here.
Across the street was the National Guard.
Yeah.
From us. Out on Barker Road, they had the Army Reserves.
Right.
The Marine Reserves left here, I think, probably around 68, because we got a lot of this stuff up into Portland from here.
Yeah. It could have been even a little bit earlier, because my brother was in the Marine Reserves.
Okay.
He had to go to Albany. He had to do it in Albany, so they had to be out.
Yeah. So I got here in 1970. I was going to be here 18 months. So I think in 70, I got extended. So in 70, late part of 72, I called my detailer, and I says, "You know, my time's getting up here." I says, "What am I going to do?" He says, "Well, you're making Chief Petty Officer." I says, "Yeah, I understand that." He says, "But you're going back to Vietnam." I said, "What?" I said, "No, I don't think so." I said, "You send me any place in the world," because I was a little bit scared about getting out of the service. You know, what am I going to do if I get out?
Yeah.
And he kept trying to talk me into it, and I says, "Look," because I knew we had started that, and by then, when I left there, we were starting to turn the PBR boats over to the Vietnamese. This is where they had a crew of, say, 5 men, I believe it was. And they would take an American off, put a Vietnamese on, until they got the whole crew turned over. And I said, no. I said, because some of these Vietnamese, when they completely took over a boat, they were using them for fishing boats. They weren't doing their job at times. So I said, no. He said, well, we want you to go back because you understand the language, you know, and all that sort of talk. And I said, no. I says, in fact, I looked over at this yeoman. I says, get my papers. I'm retiring. Send my papers in. So in 1973, a week before I retired, I got a part-time job down at Lipton Steel Company. And I would go down there afternoons working while I was still in the Navy. And I retired. Then I retired in 73, December 1973, and I went to work for Lipton Steel as safety and shipping and receiving and safety down there. And I did about 7 years there. And then they were shutting down. And fortunately, I got into the Postal Service here in Pittsfield. And that's where I met you. You were a carrier and I was a clerk there.
Yeah.
And I spent 19 and a half years in there and retired from there what was it, 21 years ago? So I'm showing my age, but I'm
Oh
trying
yeah,
not
you
to.
definitely are. No, you live. You do it well. Now, after you were in the post office, did you marry? You did marry. Did
Oh
you
yeah,
have a
I got
family?
married in 1962,
Yeah.
and in fact, 1962 and the latter part of '63, we had our first child, Cindy. And then when we was in Charleston, my wife was pregnant, and she went in the hospital at 2:30 in the morning. I was over in Europe. I was over in the Mediterranean. Found out she was going to have twins.
Wow.
And that's when my son and daughter were born, Scott and Stacy. And they will be 53 today.
Really? Today?
Today's their birthday.
Wow.
The twins' birthdays.
They're almost born under Father's birthday.
Yeah.
And not too
Yeah.
far away.
Yeah. And they're all three of them are here in Pittsfield.
Good.
And in fact, when they were born, they was in incubators for 30 days because they were so tiny. And then the wife brought them home in Charleston. She was in Charleston all by herself. One of the neighbors took care of the oldest one. And then they were in the incubators for a month, and then when they were home 2 weeks later, the boy went into a coma, Scott. And they took him into the hospital. And some intern at that time said he's going to be mentally retarded or crippled for life. And we finally got word to me that what was going on. So I put in for emergency leave, and they let me off in Sicily, and I got back home. And I went into the hospital looking for this doctor. And the CO of the hospital in Charleston had been the CO of the hospital in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which I knew.
Really?
So this nurse came up to me, she says, Miller, she says, Captain Fetter wants to see you. So I goes up to his office and I says, he says, you get yourself in trouble here. He says, I know what you're here for. He says, but he's been a letter reprimand and he's been transferred. His Navy career is over at the time. And the boy ended up as a hell of a skier. So, and now he's the buyer for Guido's Supermarket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's fine. It turned out.
Oh,
fine.
my God, yes. Yeah.
Now, did you ever keep in touch with the buddies or join any or go to any reunions?
Oh yeah, this. In fact, I'm going next month to my last reunion of the ship I was on. Yeah, we've had 15 reunions. This will be the last one. And really, the only people I kept really close to was this captain of the ship and some of the crew on there, the crews on there. Really, I haven't kept in contact with the fellows in Vietnam. I mean, there was one officer that was in our unit. He he retired as a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps. He was on Fox Channel as an advisor on Fox Channel. He eventually was special ops. He's the guy that went into Kuwait and brought the Americans out of Kuwait.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Bill Cowan's his name. He was quite a guy, quite a man. And well, in fact, yeah, there's another fellow that we chat a little bit on Facebook, George Skase. He was overseas with us, and when he retired, he went back to Vietnam and worked as looking for the POWs in the missing in action.
Really? Wow.
That's what he did, and he's done that for I think 5 or 6 years. He's now completely retired.
Wow.
But we still keep in contact. In fact, Bill Cowan sent me a picture on Facebook of his wife holding M16, and he said, "This is why I listened to her. She was CIA." But that's just about. And since I retired, and I'm completely retired now, and I play golf and ski.
Good, good. I hear you're a great skier.
I was years ago. I'm not anymore. My daughters are.
Well, I don't want to mention the other one. Did you join any veterans organizations?
When I first got out, I was a member of the VFW, local VFW. In fact, I was in what we called the elite color guard of the VFW back in the 70s. which we traveled all over the state, mostly all over New England.
Yeah, I know you guys had quite a color guard.
Yeah, we had quite a color guard back. And then I got out of that, and I really didn't join anything until about 2 years ago. One fellow that's in the Vietnam Veterans Chapter 65 here locally kept after me. He's been after me for years to join. And I finally went down and joined, and great bunch of guys down there. And they're helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people like you, Ty. Look what you do for the nursing homes and things like that, and get out into the community.
Yeah, we do what we can.
You do what you can. And I mean, I went on my first experience with you fellows down to one of the schools in Lenox.
Yeah, that's right. You were.
It's the first time I ever, did something like that. Well, back years and years ago during Vietnam, I used to go out to the Rotary clubs and speak.
Yeah.
But this is the first time I went with actually the group of Vietnam veterans, and that slide presentation you fellas have. And that was a great experience to talk to these kids.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any slides like you fellows did. I just, more or less told them what I did in the service. And the kids were very, very much interested in it.
They were, especially that school. These kids are.
And there was one thing, and I got it right here.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about any memorabilia.
This is a memorabilia I got.
Yeah, I like this story, and I would like you to tell it, the whole thing.
This is a VC flag. I believe it's made out of American parachute. This is the same stick and the lanyards tied on it. About 3 days before I left Vietnam in my village, this was stuck outside of my compound, probably about 10 yards outside the fence line. And I went on, I picked it up and I brought it in, and my interpreter I says, "What's this?" He says, "Bucksy," he says, "this is to let you know they could get to you anytime they wanted to. And they're still telling you, you're leaving, but they're still here." And when I showed this to the kids down in Lenox, one little boy popped up and he said to me, "That's a cool flag."
Yeah. What amazes me about this is, like you say, it's the stick. The stick itself, you think after all these years it would rot, and it doesn't.
No, because it come out of the swamp. You gotta remember,
it almost looks like bamboo, but
yeah, but you got to remember that area I was in was all swampland.
Right. You were down in the lowlands.
Yeah, so this was preserved. I mean, it was just, and it's amazing that it still hasn't rotted out on me.
Yeah.
And this is something I'm pretty proud of, even though.
Well, I know we had that down in the chapter for a while.
Yeah, they told me they could get to me. But, I also believe that what it was told to me, I don't know how true it is or not, but they seem to have found a hospital or something down there, and somebody they claimed they had a picture of me. I don't know how true that is or not, but they claimed that not to kill him, because if you kill him, he won't be bringing medicine into the village that we can go in at night and take away from the people.
There you go.
So maybe that's what kept me alive. I don't know, but I came back without a scratch.
It worked, let's put it that way.
Whatever worked, it worked.
Do you feel that your service experience had a positive or negative effect on your life?
Some a little bit negative, I think, but most of it was positive, because I felt as though I had done something.
Yeah.
I had done something, and I was in early enough to understand that the public appreciated us. I mean, I hitchhiked across the United States 3 times in uniform and never had any problems. And then when I got out, when I came back to the States from Vietnam, the way you kids were treated, it was disgusting. It really was. I mean, I had an officer tell me not to wear my uniform downtown Pittsfield. I says, "Sorry, sir. I'll wear it any place I want to wear it."
So you got out in 1970, right?
73.
73. See, I got out in 65.
Right.
So I didn't have to go through what a lot of the fellas did as the war went
Yeah,
on.
but I mean, I hate to bring up my age again, but being older, I think I didn't accept it. Not at all. But it didn't affect me, I think, as much as the younger guys. Because I could just brush it off.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew being a career man, I knew what I'd done. And these punks didn't seem to faze me.
Yeah. Well, see, a lot of the fellows that were coming back with 2-year servicemen, they didn't have the experience and,
right.
and the age,
And the age, yeah. It was
tough for a lot of them.
It was tough for a lot of them. I think. And that's why I enjoy going down to the chapter. And when I walk in the door, here comes Pop. You guys will say, "What was your Civil War? Was the Civil War you started?" And it's great that they can tease me and I can tease them. In fact, the other day, one of the guys came up and says, "You know, Doc, you're the Don Rickles of this place. You can come out with some of the worst sayings." But it's just great, and then I want to know, I appreciate you doing this for me, because I think my kids will have something for them to have.
Well, I hope they will.
And thank you very.
Thank you very much, Doc, for sharing your story and your service. Thank you.
Thank you for your service, buddy.